I want to talk to you about your back for a minute, and about your knees, and about that little groan you make now when you kneel down in the dirt in the spring. You feel it. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a voice tells you that you are getting old, that the garden is getting to be too much for you, that maybe next year you ought to let it go smaller. I want you to hear me plain right at the start. That pain is not your fault. The tiredness is not a sign that you are failing at this. You have been sold a way of gardening that fights your body on purpose, a way built on bending and digging and hauling and buying, and the ache in your spine at the end of a Saturday is not the price of a good garden. It is the price of the wrong method. The people who sold you the tiller and the bags of fertilizer and the little plastic trays of seedlings, they never once had a reason to tell you there was a gentler way. So you kept digging, you kept bending, you kept paying, and your grandmother, who fed a family of 8 off a patch of ground the size of your living room, did less of all 3 and pulled in more food than you do. Now I want you to sit with this. There is a whole way of growing food that our grandparents knew, a way that asks less of your body every single year instead of more, and grows a bigger harvest off less ground, and it runs almost entirely on things you already throw in the trash. Cardboard, straw, kitchen water, wood ash, old logs rotting at the fence line. That is the whole shopping list, and most of it is free. Meanwhile, the fellow down at the garden center will sell you a rototiller for $400 and a season of fertilizer and sprays and starter plants for $200 or $300 more. And next spring, he will sell you all of it again because the way he taught you to garden wears out the soil and wears out your back both, so you have to keep coming back. There is no money in teaching you the old way. There is a great deal of money in the new one. Stay with me, and I will tell it slow. My name is Jonas Stoltzfus. I am Amish, and I farm in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, with my wife Barbara on ground. My family has worked since my people came over from the old country in 1838. And I am going to be honest with you the way I always am, because honesty is the only thing that makes a video like this one worth your time. I have gathered the whole of what I know about growing the old way into a book, and it sits over at jonasstoltzfus.com if you ever want it, and I will not bring it up again, so you can settle in and just listen. And here's my first honest word to you. Some of what I am going to say sounds almost too easy, and there is a reason for that. The old ways are not clever. They are not secret. They are just patient, and patience does not sell in a store. I am also not going to pretend I invented any of this. My grandfather did not invent it either. Most of it is older than this country. What I can promise you is that every method I give you today, I have done with my own hands on my own ground. And I will tell you where each one works wonders and where it falls short. Because a man who only tells you the good half is trying to sell you something. So let me start where all of it starts, which is the soil. Because once you understand the ground under your feet, every other thing I tell you today will make plain sense. Here is the thing the fertilizer companies would rather you never think about too hard. Good soil is not dirt. Good soil is alive. In one handful of healthy garden ground, there are more little living creatures than there are people on the whole earth. Fungi finer than spider silk, bacteria, worms, all of them working day and night. And their whole job, the only job they have, is to take dead things and turn them into food for your plants. A scientist calls that the soil food web. My grandfather just called it the ground doing its own chores. And here is the part that ought to make you a little angry. Every single time you run a tiller through that ground, you tear all of that living work apart. You slice the worms, you shred the fungal threads, you flip the buried life up into the killing sun. The ground looks fluffy and beautiful for about 2 weeks, and then it slumps down harder than before, and it is hungrier than before, because you just killed the very things that were feeding it for free. So now it needs a bag of fertilizer. And the tiller that did the damage, and the fertilizer that patches the damage, are very often sold to you by the same kind of business. I am not going to stand in my barn and tell you a room full of men planned that on purpose. It is worse than that, and stranger. Nobody had to plan it at all. It is just that a garden that feeds itself is a terrible customer, and a garden that needs saving every spring is a wonderful one. And so the wonderful customer is the only one anybody ever teaches you to be. So the whole first family of trucks I am going to give you is simply this. Stop digging. Feed the life in the ground instead of killing it, and let it do the digging for you. And the first of them is the one I would start any tired body on, and it is the deep mulch, no-dig bed. Here is the parts list, and the total cost is somewhere close to nothing. You need cardboard, the plain brown kind from boxes, with the tape and the staples pulled off. You need a load of mulch, and that can be straw, or fall leaves, or grass clippings, or half-rotted wood chips, whatever you have. And you need a little patience. That is all. Now I will tell it slow. You do not dig. You do not pull the weeds. You lay the cardboard right down on top of the grass and the weeds, flat, overlapping the edges by a good hand's width, so no light sneaks through the seams. Then you wet it down until it is soaked, so it lies flat and starts to soften. Then you pile your mulch on top, 4 inches, 6 is better. And then you walk away. Here is the part most folks get wrong. They peek. They pull the mulch back to see what is happening, and they let the light in, and they ruin it. You leave it be. Under that cardboard, in the dark and the damp, every weed suffocates. The worms come up by the thousand to eat the softening paper. And by the time you are ready to plant, that packed old sod has turned into loose black crumb you can put your bare hand into. Studies on this kind of covering show it can cut soil loss from wind and rain by up to 90% while it works. And I believe it, because I have seen ground that used to wash out in a storm sit quiet and hold under 6 inches of leaves. When you want to plant, you just pull back a little mulch, tuck your seedling in, close it up around the stem. No tiller, no bending over a shovel, and every year that bed gets richer instead of poorer, because you are feeding it from the top the way the forest feeds itself, and the forest never once got tilled. The second in this family is the chop and drop, and it is the laziest good habit I know. Nature has one hard rule, which is that she never leaves the skin of the ground bare to the sun and the rain. Bare dirt is a wound, and she rushes to cover it, which is all a weed really is. A bandage she sends in because you left the ground naked. So the mistake nearly every modern gardener makes is cleaning the garden up too well. You pull every spent plant at the end of the season, you rake it all off to the burn pile, and you leave the bed stripped bare all winter, bleeding out its life. Do the opposite. When a plant is finished, a bean vine, a spent lettuce, a tomato, in October, you do not pull it. You take a knife or shears and you cut it off right at the soil line and you drop it right there where it grew. Leave the roots in the ground to rot because those rotting roots are highways of air and food for the worms. And the leaves and stems on top become a blanket. That blanket holds moisture so well it can cut your watering by up to 70%, and as it breaks down it becomes a feast for all that living work underground. The ground gets fed by exactly the thing that grew out of it. That is a circle, and a circle costs nothing to keep turning. The third in the soil family is lasagna composting, and it is compost for a person whose back is done turning a pile. You do not build a heap and flip it with a fork every week. You build it in flat layers, right on the ground or in a bin, like you are building up a pan of lasagna. A layer of green, which is your wet nitrogen stuff, kitchen scraps and fresh grass and coffee grounds. Then a layer of brown, which is your dry carbon stuff, dead leaves, straw, torn cardboard, old newspaper. Then green again, then brown again, and you keep on stacking as your scraps come in. You never turn it. The layers and the natural heat and the little creatures do the whole job in the dark, and in a season or two the bottom of it is black crumbling gold that you scoop out and spread. Barbara keeps ours going by the kitchen door all winter, and every scrap that used to go in the trash goes on the stack instead. And come spring, we have a wheelbarrow of the finest fertilizer, money cannot buy, made from garbage. Now, before I go on to the second family, let me pause for just a moment, because this is the kind of knowing that used to pass over the fence from one house to the next and does not anymore. If you want to lower your bills, waste less, repair more, and grow a steadier garden with your neighbors instead of alone, Barbara and I keep a little community for exactly that, where you can ask the two of us your questions whenever you get stuck, and the link for it is down in the description. That is all. Now let me show you how to make the garden work for you instead of the other way around. The second family is about letting plants and creatures do the labor that you have been doing by hand, and it starts with the oldest partnership in this country's ground, which the native people here called the Three Sisters. Here is why it works, and once you see it, you will wonder why we ever planted things in lonely single rows. You plant corn and beans and squash together in the same little hill, and each one does a job for the other two. The corn shoots up tall and straight and becomes the pole that the beans climb, so you never buy a trellis and never pound a stake. The beans, and this is the quiet miracle of it, pull nitrogen right out of the thin air and pack it down into the soil through their roots, feeding the hungry corn for free, and nitrogen is the exact thing you have been paying for in a bag. And the squash sprawls its big rough leaves flat across the ground below, shading out the weeds, holding in the water, its prickly stems turning back the critters. 3 plants, 1 hill, and they feed each other and hold each other up and guard each other, and all you did was put them in the ground together. A single crop standing alone drains the soil and begs for help. 3 sisters standing together hand the soil back most of what they take. That is companion planting in one picture, and there are a dozen more pairings like it once you learn to think that way. The second in this working garden family is the flower you plant on purpose that you never mean to eat, and the queen of those is the marigold. Those bright orange and yellow heads are not just pretty. Down under the ground, marigold roots put out a compound that drives off the tiny worms called nematodes, the ones that stunt your tomatoes without you ever seeing them. Up top, their smell confuses the bugs that hunt by scent for your beans and your greens, so a beetle looking for a potato plant gets lost in a hedge of marigolds and gives up. You ring your beds with them, or you tuck them down the rows between your vegetables, and you have built a fence that no bug can climb, and that costs you a pinch of seed. Plant the sweet-smelling ones too, lavender and the like, and you do double duty, because those same flowers pull in the bees and the butterflies. And here is a truth that stings a lot of gardeners. Plenty of gardens are green and healthy and still barely fruit, and the reason is there is nobody there to do the pollinating. No bees, no fruit. It is that simple. A row of flowers among your vegetables is not decoration. It is you hiring a work crew of pollinators and paying them in nectar, which they are glad to take. The third in this family is the insect hotel. And I know it sounds like a foolishness, but hear me out, because it is real. The trouble with a too tidy modern yard is that the good bugs, the ladybugs that eat aphids by the hundred, the little mason bees that outwork honeybees at pollinating, they have nowhere to live. So you build them a house out of scraps. Take an old wooden box or a length of pipe, and you stuff it full of hollow, dry stems, pine cones, blocks of wood with holes drilled in them, dry leaves. You set it in a quiet corner out of the wind, up off the ground, and those little gaps become homes for the very predators that hunt the pests you have been fighting with a spray can. You are not killing the aphids yourself anymore. You are boarding the army that kills them for free and asking nothing of it but a place to sleep. A garden with a chorus of bugs in it is not a sick garden. It is a healthy one that has finally reached its own balance, and it will hold that balance long after you have stopped fussing at it. Now, let me get to the family I care about most for you, because you told me at the start of this that your back and your knees are the reason you are thinking of quitting, and this family is the answer to exactly that. This is about growing at a height your body can stand, and watering without hauling a single can, and pulling a big potato harvest without ever sinking a shovel. And the first of them is the raised bed made from what you already own. You do not need to buy cedar boards and brackets. An old trash can, a stock tank with a rusted out spot, a broken barrel, a stack of the cardboard and mulch we already made. Any of it. Drill a few drainage holes in the bottom, fill it with good soil and compost, and you have a garden that comes up to your waist. And that changes everything about your body's day. You are not folded over the ground anymore. You tend it standing up or sitting on a stool, with your spine straight and your knees quiet. The pain you thought was the garden getting to be too much for you was never the garden. It was the height. Lift the garden up to meet you, and you can grow food into your 90s. My grandmother did. The second in this body-saving family is the clay pot buried in the bed, which the old world called an olla, and it is the smartest watering a lazy man ever invented. Here is why it works. When you water the top of the soil with a hose or a can, most of that water flashes off into the hot air before it ever reaches a root, and what does soak in draws the roots up toward the surface where they dry out and suffer. An olla waters from underneath instead. You take an unglazed clay pot, the plain terracotta kind, plug the drain hole with a cork or a dab of silicone, and bury it up to its neck right among your plant roots. You fill it with water and cap the top so it does not evaporate. Now, unglazed clay is full of tiny pores, and water seeps through those pores slow and steady, but only, and this is the beautiful part, only when the soil around it is dry. When the ground has enough, the seeping stops on its own. The pot and the dirt reach a kind of agreement, and the plant is never drowned and never thirsty. And you fill that pot maybe once a week and walk away. Even in a dry spell, even when you are gone for days. No hauling, no standing there with a hose, no timer to buy, a clay pot and a cork. The third in this family, and I saved it because it saves the most work of all, is growing potatoes in a tower of straw, with no digging on either end. The way the books tell you to grow potatoes is a punishment. You dig a trench, you hill up soil over the plants 3 or 4 times through the summer with a hoe, and then at the end you dig the whole bed again by hand, feeling around in the dirt for tubers, half of which you slice with the shovel. My grandfather grew more potatoes than that with a rake and never bent his back. Here is how. You lay your seed potatoes right on top of loose ground, or even on the cardboard of a new bed in a sunny spot. You do not bury them in soil at all. You cover them with 2 handspans of straw or dry leaves. That mulches their soil. As the green shoots push up, you do not hill them with dirt. You just keep piling on more straw. The potato plant has a trick, which is that any part of the stem you cover will grow new roots and new potatoes along it. So the taller you build the straw, the more potatoes you get up the length of the stem, all of them growing loose and clean in the soft straw instead of packed in hard dirt. And when it is time to harvest, you do not dig at all. You push the straw aside with your hands and pick the potatoes up off the ground like eggs, clean and whole. A tower like that can give you 40 to 60 pounds off a patch the size of a bath towel. And I will be honest with you, you will read numbers like 100 pounds, and in a fine year with a long season, a real gardener can push toward that, but 40 to 60 is what you will truly pull your first go. And that is honest, and it is still a wonder. The reason this method got forgotten is a plain one. It does not work for the big machines. There are no straight rows for a tractor, no place for the industrial fertilizer. It only works for a person and a garden, which is exactly what you are. Now, I promised you I would be straight. So let me give you the safety word plainly, because this matters, and because a garden that hurts you is not a bargain no matter how much it saves. First, your back and your body, since that is the whole reason we are here. When you do lift, and there is always some lifting, a bag of soil, a full watering can, you bend at the knees and not at the waist, you keep the load close against your belly, and you let your legs do the work, not your spine. You never twist while you are holding weight. You turn your whole feet. Fill that watering can half full and make 2 trips, because 2 light trips are cheaper than 1 throw of your back that lays you up for a month. Keep a kneeling pad or a low stool within reach and use it, and get up and stretch every 20 minutes, because it is the staying bent that hurts you more than the bending. Second, the tools. A garden fork or a broad fork left tines up in the grass will put a handle through the air and into your chin, or worse, into your foot, so you lay every tool down with the business end to the ground, always. Keep your blades sharp, because a sharp tool cuts with a push, and a dull one makes you force it, and forcing is how you slip and cut yourself. And one more, on the wood ash, I am about to praise. Ash is strong stuff. It is caustic when it is wet, so you wear gloves when you handle it, and you keep it out of your eyes, and you keep it well away from the little acid-loving plants, the blueberries and the azaleas, because ash is very alkaline, and it will do them harm. There, that is the honest safety of it, and I would rather tell you plain than have you learn it the hard way. Now let me give you what I promised at the top. 3 things our grandparents did not even have, or did not have easy, that carry the same old spirit, and that I have proven on my own ground, because I will not give you only the museum pieces when there is better to be had. The first is the buried wood bed, and the old German farmers called it a hugelkultur, a mound culture, though you do not need a mound and you do not need the German. Here is the idea, and it is a marvel for a dry garden and a tired gardener both. You dig a shallow trench, or you just start on top of the ground, and you lay in it old rotting logs, dead branches, punky wood from the fence line, the stuff you would haul to the burn pile. Then you cover that wood over with your turned sod upside down, then with compost and leaves and straw, and you plant on top of the whole heap. Now here is why it is worth the one afternoon of work. That buried wood acts like a giant sponge. Through the wet of spring, it soaks up gallons of water and holds them, and all through the dry of summer, it lets that water back out slow into the roots above, so a hugel bed can go weeks without rain, and never wilt, watering itself from the log up. And as that wood rots down over the years, it feeds a colony of fungi that turns the whole bed into some of the richest, softest, deepest ground you will ever put a seed in, and it stays fluffy and high off the ground, so you barely have to stoop. You build it once, and it feeds and waters itself for 5 or 10 years. Our grandmothers did not have a pile of scrap lumber and dead limbs the way we do now, so this is an old idea come into its own in our time. The second new thing is biochar, and this is a cousin of the wood ash, but a far better one, and it is nearly free if you heat with wood the way we do. When wood burns all the way down to gray ash, most of the good is gone. But the black charcoal chunks, the ones that did not fully burn, the ones you would normally rake out and toss, those are the treasure. Charcoal is riddled with tiny holes, millions of them in a single piece, more surface inside one lump than you would believe, and those holes become apartment houses for the good bacteria and a bank vault that holds water and nutrients in the soil so they cannot wash away. But here is the part folks get wrong. And it matters. So mind it. You do not put fresh, raw charcoal straight into your garden, because at first it is empty and greedy, and it will pull nutrients out of your soil to fill its own holes and starve your plants for a season. You charge it first. You crush the charcoal so rocoal small, and you soak it a week or 2 in something rich, in compost tea, in the fish tank water, in old diluted urine even, which our grandfathers were not too proud to use, until all those little holes are full up. Then you work the charged black char into your beds, a couple handfuls a square yard, and it stays there working for you, not for 1 year, but for a lifetime. There is charcoal in the ground in the old world that farmers made this way 2,000 years ago, and that ground is still the richest for miles. That is a long time for a handful of what you were about to throw in the trash. And the third new thing is the cover crop you grow all winter and never once harvest. What the old-timers who did know it called green manure. You spoke of your ground lying bare and cold and dead all winter under the snow, doing nothing, that is waste. And it is worse than waste, because bare winter ground washes away and hardens up. So the last week of your fall garden, instead of leaving the beds naked, you scatter a cheap mix of field peas and oats or winter rye, thick, and rake it in and forget it. It sprouts in the cool, it holds green through the mild days, its roots reach down deep and break up the packed soil for you all winter long, no fork needed, and the peas, being cousins to the beans, pull nitrogen from the air and pack the beds full of it while you sleep. Then in the spring, you do not dig it under the way the machines do. You chop it down at the soil line, the very chop and drop we already spoke of, and you lay it right there as a mulch, and you plant straight through it. You have fed the soil, tilled the soil, and fertilized the soil, all three, over the winter for the price of a bag of seed, and you never lifted a tool to do it. That is the old spirit exactly. Let the plants and the seasons do the labor, and keep your own back for the harvest. So now let me say the hard part out loud, the part I have been circling. Why did all of this get lost? Why did your own grandmother know a dozen of these and you had to hear them from an Amish man on a screen? It is not because the old ways stopped working. They work better than ever. It is because there is a great deal of money in a gardener who fights his soil, and there is no money at all in a gardener who feeds it. Think it through with me. A tiller that you buy and burn fuel in every spring, that is a sale, and the no-dig bed that replaces it is not. A bag of fertilizer you must rebuy every single season because the tilling burned out the last one, that is a sale, and the beans that pull their own nitrogen from the sky are not. A tray of seedlings you buy new each May is a sale, and the seed you save from your own best plant is a theft from that sale. The pretty little plastic pots, the sprays, the special watering gadgets, all of it, every one is a thing sold to you over and over, and the old way replaces every one of them with something free that lasts. So the old way sits quiet in a few farmhouses like ours, not because anybody banned it, not because a room full of men decided to bury it, but because it had no money behind it to shout, and the bags and the machines had all the money in the world. That is not a conspiracy. It is worse in a way, and stranger. It is just who had a reason to teach you and who did not. The garden tool and fertilizer trade did not have to lie to you. It only had to keep quiet about the free way and let the free way slip out of the conversation, one grandmother at a time. So here is what I want you to do this week. And start small, because small is how a thing lasts. First, do not till anything. Pick one bed, the worst one you have, and lay cardboard and mulch over it and leave it alone, and let the worms start your no-dig for you. Second, stop throwing away 3 things, starting today: your cardboard, your kitchen scraps, and if you burn wood, your ash and your charcoal, and find a corner to stack each one, because those 3 are the whole foundation of everything I told you. Third, before your season ends, buy 1 cheap bag of field peas and oats and scatter it over your emptying beds so the ground works for you all winter instead of lying dead. That is the whole homework. Cardboard down, scraps saved, cover crops scattered. A person of ordinary strength can do all 3 in an afternoon, and your back will thank you next spring, and so will your harvest. Now come back and tell me in the comments what you tried and what you saw, because I read every single one. And tell me 2 things while you are there. Tell me what county you garden in and how cold your winters get, so I know what will grow for you. And tell me the one gardening trick your own grandmother or grandfather used, the little family method that never got written down anywhere, because those are exactly the kind of knowing that vanishes when nobody says it out loud. And the comments on this video are how you and I save them together. Next time, I'm going to show you the old way my people save seed from our own best plants, year after year, so you never have to buy a seed packet again, and it is the natural next step after everything we did today. Until then, remember this. The ache in your back was never proof that you were too old for the garden. It was only proof that somebody sold you the hard way and kept the gentle one quiet. The people who built this country with their hands, who fed whole families off small ground into their old age, they knew things we are only just starting to remember. The Lord bless you and keep you, and I will see you next time, if we are spared and willing.